panelists to come on in, and as they do so, I'm just going to set the stage a little bit more about broadband and why we need better broadband, better lives. That is our motto at Broadband Breakfast. We are a news, events, and community focused on better broadband, better lives, and we've been doing events actually for 16 years, but the pandemic kind of put a new focus first on remote events. We did our Broadband Breakfast Live online, which we still do every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time or 9 a.m. Pacific, since we're out here in Sacramento. And we've done about 5 events a year. We did one called the Broadband Measurement Summit. We're preparing for the Digital Infrastructure Investment Summit in September. And this, of course, is our first event outside of Washington with a partner like CalMatters, whom we are super, super excited to work with. The format for the day, just extremely briefly, is, and you can see on your programs here, we encourage you to take these as a good supplement to the CalMatters Ideas Festival that continues after we conclude. This is, I guess I'm calling it 4.5 sessions. Panel 1, which I'm about to kick off with our panelists, will be on the California broadband moment and setting the stage for discussions of broadband infrastructure and deployment and usage here in California. And then we're going to roll right from that into a fireside Q&A on connecting the dots on digital equity. And I'll introduce our speaker for that when we get to that. And then following that, just a little before noon, we will adjourn and go upstairs for lunch. All of you have registered for the California Broadband Summit / CalMatters Ideas Festival, so you're welcome to lunch upstairs, leisurely time, hopefully, and then back down here at 1 o'clock for panels 2, 3, and 4. I'll be saying a little bit more about those in the course of our discussion, but they will be on the Middle Mile program, which is sort of a unique thing that California is doing, and in some ways an impetus for this discussion here. California's cost to build, maybe a bit of a kind of a controversial or a sore spot, but we're going to take that head on. And then net neutrality and privacy, and the key role that California has played in that issue, which is heating up again on the national level. So that's just an outline of our day, and then it rolls into sessions on the CalMatters Ideas Festival on AI, disinformation, and other events this afternoon and this evening. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our panel. I have to kind of stand here a little bit, be a little far from you because they said we can't get 7 seats on the stage, but I am thrilled to be able to be closer to you in spirit. And I'm going to introduce our speakers as they will kick off with opening statements, very brief opening statements before we really drill into this topic. So on your left is Robert Osborn. Robert is the director of the Communications Division at the California Public Utilities Commission, and we'll definitely have a chance to learn about the unique way California has structured its broadband office. I guess the bottom line is he's the guy with the money, right? So he is responsible for the BEAD program, and we'll hear more about the specific ways that California has delineated responsibilities. But Rob, we're so pleased to have you with us. Next to Rob is Representative Tasha Boerner. So excited that Assembly Member Boerner, who really plays a key role in the broadband issue space. Do you call it Capitol Hill here in Sacramento?
No, we just call it the Capitol.
The Capitol. Okay, so I can't say California's Capitol Hill. I have to say California's Capitol. But anyway, Representative Boerner, we're so glad you could be with us here today and give us your legislative perspective. And next to Representative Boerner is Patrick Blacklock. Patrick is CEO of the Rural County Representatives of California. And I didn't know what RC was before, and I may not yet still know what RC is, but Patrick will tell us what it is and why they're so important in California's broadband moment. Next to Patrick is Marc Blakeman. Thank you for being here. Marc is the president of California and Pacific States for AT&T, and I guess you're a lifer at AT&T, and he has done extensive work in wireless, fiber, policy, you name it, Marc has done it. And we are super excited to be able to have him talk about the particular role that California is playing and the way, as I understand it, public-private partnerships can extend that funding further. Next to Marc is Carl Guardino. Carl is Vice President of Government Affairs and Policy at Tarana Wireless. Tarana has really done amazing things for fixed wireless, and I'm sure I'm maybe giving the commercial ahead of time, but Carl will tell us why it's so different from your grandfather's fixed wireless, and yet at the same time, as I'm sure Marc will say, it's no match for fiber. So we're going to want to hear and get into this discussion a little bit about technologies, and we clearly have a representative of the premier fiber builder in the United States here with Marc Blakeman. Carl will be able to represent what Tarana's doing, and then last but definitely not least on our panel is Janus Norman. Janus is president of CalBroadband, and as president, he's responsible for overseeing and directing operations of communications industries in California. He is very engaged, and all of your members are as well. And I wanted to give a quick shout out. On the back of your program, you see the sponsors for the California Broadband Summit. We would not be able to do this program without the support of our sponsors. And we again urge you to follow our work, our news reporting, our other events, and be a part of the community on Broadband Breakfast through the support of our sponsors. Our sponsors for this event are AT&T, our diamond sponsor. Our gold sponsors are Tarana and CalBroadband, and special shout out to our silver sponsor, who's not represented on this stage, but has played an incredible behind-the-scenes role in helping us to do this program right and not mess up. And that is the California Emerging Technology Fund. A huge shout out to Sunny McPeak for everything she's done, as well as Nadine Hugg and the others on the team who are here. So with that, let's dive right in. Rob, tell us a little bit about what is unique about the way California is tackling the broadband build-out.
Sure, thank you. I'm Rob Osborn, Director of the Communications Division at the Public Utilities Commission. Thanks for having me here today. Just wanted to clarify that there is no single broadband office in California, and as is common with a lot of state initiatives here in the state, examples being collaboration with the Energy Commission on large state initiatives, collaboration with the Air Resources Board. The California Public Utilities Commission collaborates very closely with the California Department of Technology and other agencies, as has been the case over the past decade through the California Broadband Council, which meets regularly several times a year. Over time, the PUC has been funding broadband grants since 2008. So we talk about meeting the moment. This has been going on actually for a long time. I think a lot of what's happened now has been highlighted by the COVID pandemic. But over time, the California Advanced Services Fund, which is what we call our legacy program for funding broadband, has expanded to cover not just broadband infrastructure, but also adoption, line extension, public housing, broadband consortia, tribal technical assistance. This includes $300 million of last mile funds that were used to connect nearly 320,000 households, 400 adoption awards that provided more than $40 million for digital literacy training to over 85,000 Californians, and over $5 million in tribal technical assistance to 33 tribes. So as I said earlier, the COVID pandemic really brought to light how much more was needed to connect Californians, and grounded in the governor's executive order in 2020 calling for broadband for all, the legislature really had the foresight to pass Senate Bill 156, which provided much needed funding for last mile and middle mile for areas that were chronically overlooked and unserved. Some examples of this include connecting community in San Gerardo in the Monterey Bay area with Equal Access Monterey Bay, Cruise.io, which is a small internet service provider, the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, and the Central Coast Broadband Consortium to connect farm worker households, a daycare, and a community center. It's the San Gerardo Cooperative. They provide free service to all those community members. Another involves connecting 194 households, serving 740 residents in Hollister, California, including 130 school-age children currently enrolled in the public school system with gigabit service. So there are many ways to deploy and operate broadband networks, ranging from a fully private model to a fully public model, and variations in between. The key point here is expanding the ecosystem of providers to bring service where providers haven't gone. And as we've seen, we've begun funding broadband deployment through that model. So the first step in that effort really was with Senate Bill 156. We started something called the Local Agency Technical Assistance Program, which aimed to award $50 million in broadband planning grants to over 100 cities, Joint Powers Authority, including most counties, as well as tribes, including the Round Valley Indian Tribe, the Boerner Band of Mission Indians, and the San Ynez Band of Chumash Indians. These local agency technical assistance grants were used for broadband planning at the city, county, Joint Powers Authority, tribal level to really take broadband matters into their own hand and figure out how do we serve the communities that have not been getting broadband since the time that I've been here at the commission. And so the latter grantees received their awards in 2022 and began their broadband planning. And it was those plans that put them in a position to apply for the next step of this, Senate Bill 156, which is the federal funding last mile account, which is $2 billion allocated across all the counties to provide last mile funding. What we saw was 75% of these local agency technical assistance grantees either applied for or were part of applications that went into this federal funding account application cycle, which opened in June of last year. We received a record number, nearly 500 applications, for more than twice the amount of money that was allocated to the fund, which really underscores the demand and the need across the state. And so as a deliberative public agency, we're subject to both state and federal audits, as well as extensive reporting requirements. The CPUC follows a public process. We follow Bagley-Keene rules. And I've heard it said from other states that with smaller operations where they just have a single broadband office, that we are maybe too transparent. We've adopted program rules and implemented county allocations. As we know, with last mile programs, considerably more time is required to develop a new program in a responsible way. So we've seen other states still working on developing programs to implement funding that came through the ARPA, through the federal funding. We're, I think, moving along pretty well. Finally, the BEAD program, for which California has been allocated $1.86 billion. This funding will complement the efforts that were already underway with the federal funding account. So we're working with NTIA to get approval for our initial proposal, Volume 2, and expect to have it approved in the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we're going to talk a lot more about timeline as we go on, but let's go right into our next speaker, Representative Boerner.
Hi, my name's Tasha Boerner. I represent coastal San Diego, which is, if it's beautiful in San Diego, it's mine. So maybe some of you here. And I also chair the Committee on Communication and Conveyance in the Assembly, which has telecommunications, broadband, autonomous vehicles, Uber, Lyft, moving companies, and because I'm fun, party buses. So I've been on the committee since I was elected in 2018. And I've chaired it now for this is my second year chairing it, and I love this space. It's a very technical space, and for you, those of you who decided to join us, I wish all the chairs were full here, because it is such an important issue. I remember when I was a kid, my dad was working on ending the digital divide in the 90s. We were talking about this. And so we have a historic opportunity with the $7.1 billion that Californians committed to do broadband for all. And we have some challenges, though. We have the funding, but it's not enough to connect everybody. And part of that was the decision with the ARPA funding, which we call FFA here, to not use fixed wireless, which in parts of California might be the more cost-effective way to reach everyone. But we also have challenges in timelines. So while I respect my panelists here, Rob Osborn with the CPUC, we were told that grants were going to go out in June 2022. It's now June 2024. Not a single last mile dollar has been awarded. And that's a problem because middle mile in California, because we do not have an Office of Broadband and Digital Equity, as I may want, because we don't have that, the middle mile is going forward at a much faster rate. But we don't know if we're over or under or correctly building the middle mile, because we don't know where all those last mile connections will be. And I think to your point, we do have a blend here, and we should have a blend between completely private, public-private, and public options. But we have to think about how are we using those dollars most effectively. And there's been some challenges with the middle mile, some historic communities who have not had wireline service at speeds that people need today to do their schoolwork, to work from home, to get the information they need for telehealth, were left out of that middle mile. And so and now we're in a budget deficit year, so we're trying to figure out how to best do that. And I think there needs to be accountability. I think one of the biggest challenges I see, so my role, just so you understand, CPUC, legislature, is we have, CPUC in California is a constitutionally separate agency, an authority. So our role is usually legislative oversight, and Rob has endured my interrogations on many a time. And always comes out smiling. Where's the smile? There we go. But one of our challenges is I think we're measuring it wrong. I was talking with one of my colleagues who's a senator here, and we were talking about the metric we're using in California is wrong. The metric of success that I think the CPUC and CDT use is how many miles of fiber are in the ground. And I think the correct metric, and maybe it's because I'm an elected, is how many people are served. Take that 7.1 billion and let's connect the people that are served. And if we change just that frame and say, we're not talking about the 170, or I don't remember the exact number you said in Hollister that were connected. I think there is something in the hundreds. But let's talk about how we're gonna use that 7.1 billion to connect people and households, because that's actually who we're serving. So I see some challenges with the planning, I see some challenges with our timeline, and we haven't even allocated any of the FFA grants, much less the BEAD. And so I think when we look at that, there's a challenge there. So, but I know it's
all right.
We have
Well,
a short panel.
thanks for keeping it interesting, Representative Boerner.
It's always fun with me.
Let's hear now from Patrick, and tell us all what RCRC is.
I'll happily do that. The Rural County Representatives of California, or RCRC, as it is affectionately known, is a nonprofit mutual benefit corporation made up of 40 California counties and governed by a county supervisor from each of those counties. And their vision for us is to be both their advocate in Sacramento and in DC, and an innovative service provider. And really what they're saying is we are their entrepreneurial arm. When there is a challenge too big for one small county to address on their own, they come to us to see if through the power of 40 we can achieve the economies of scale needed to address that challenge. And over the years we've formed new public agencies, new nonprofits to address everything from housing and home ownership to improving the health of our forests to most recently broadband. And really what prompted that broadband is what the Assembly member was referencing with these long-standing challenges of access to telehealth, economic development opportunities. The pandemic certainly highlighted education. And even one county was talking about a state parks program that required internet in order to purchase a pass, but there wasn't any internet, and it had been implemented in the county. And so these sort of dilemmas have been there for a long time. That prompted RCRC to actively engage with the development of SB 156 that Rob referenced earlier. And when that was passed, we knew we were at a point where we were going to have to help our small rural counties because they simply don't have the capacity, the staff, to even go after those grants. And so a new public agency was formed, Golden State Connect Authority. It is a joint powers agency made up of 40 California counties. And I like to say that it was formed 2.5 years ago with a budget of 0. And within 1 year had 19 million, thanks to the later grants that Rob referenced, to do actual engineering amongst those counties, and presently has 1.2 billion in financing pending before the CPUC to actually construct a publicly owned open access network. A publicly owned open access network, think of that like an airport, where the public agency constructs the airport, but then opens it up to private airlines to come in and use it. Same here. The public agency constructs the fiber, and in some cases points to wireless fiber, but fiber, and then opens it up to private ISPs so that the consumer has multiple options in the end of the day in terms of what they want to choose for their internet delivery. And I think where we are presently in California is we're very much at a pivotal point in terms of, do we continue to invest in the potential for a publicly owned open access system like that? As the Assembly member referenced, we have a budget challenge, and one of the key components to SB 156 was a funding mechanism called loan loss reserve that's presently been set to 0. We recognize there needs to be a reduction if we are to address the state budget, but setting it to zero has a pretty dramatic impact on the potential for a publicly owned open access network. So we are actively advocating again to hopefully keep in place the original vision of SB 156, which is to allow, as the Assembly member referenced, public-private, and private entities to move into communities that have historically been underserved, including rural communities and the tribal communities within them.
Well, as you can see, we're really setting the smorgasbord for our discussion here with lots of different angles and perspectives. And we've heard from like public and nonprofit. Now we get to hear from businesses and how they're approaching it. So on to you, Marc. Give us your thoughts.
Great, thanks, Drew. Thank you for having me today. I think one of the key things that I think the key theme through all this is we all are supporting this concept of broadband for everyone. And that's a commonality that we all share is how do we bring broadband to every household, every business, every farm, every ranch here in the state of California. As Patrick just mentioned, we do have a budget challenge from a private perspective, I like the idea of the private-public partnerships as a way to help extend the state's money. I'm very proud of my company put in 250 applications for FFA money in this first round of FFA applications, and we asked for roughly about, I think, a little over $1 billion in subsidy money, but we matched that with $1.6 billion of our own money to connect roughly 270,000 unserved households in California. If we were to win all of them, and we don't expect to win all of them, but in aggregate, that's what we put in, and that's going to help the state. If we win some of those, and putting in some of our own skin in the game helps the state's money go further. When public and private companies are working public and the private companies are working together to extend those budget dollars. The other thing that's really important here too, as we're looking at budget crunches, is the fact that we spend $14 billion over the last 4 years just to maintain our networks here in the state of California. So this isn't a one and done proposition. We're investing billions of dollars and have a once in a lifetime opportunity to invest in broadband here in the state. But how do we sustain that moving forward? And having those public-private partnerships where private capital can help extend those dollars and sustain them into the future is going to be very, very important. And then the last thing I would say is something that AT&T is really focused on, and some of it has, Assemblymember Boerner mentioned, the nomenclature of the middle mile and what we're focusing on. I would say that one of the biggest issues that we have here is talking about the last mile. And that's really a fallacy in the sense that the last mile in some cases is the last 30 miles. And that costs a lot of money, particularly on our tribal lands, to connect that. So even with the middle mile project that the state's working on, there's still going to be places in this state that are going to be 20, 30, 40 miles away from an internet pop. And we need to be focused on how we can bring that middle mile closer and how we can find companies that are willing to partner with the state to bring those last 20 miles of access to some of those lands. And we've been working very keenly with the tribal communities here, and I'm really proud of the fact that we're about ready to break ground with the San Pasqual Tribe of Indians in San Diego County down by Tasha's area, and to bring internet to every single household on that reservation. Again, not with any government money, but with the tribe's money, where they've come in and said, we want to partner with you and we want to bring this in. We've also opened what we call connected learning centers. In fact, we're about ready. I see Alice Perez on my team in the office. We're about ready. I think it's our 9th or 10th one in the state of California here in Sacramento. And these are computer labs where we come in, bring fiber into a community, outfit it with computers, outfit it with 3 years of service, with the training, with content on those computers to make those available to community members. And we've done that on 2 tribal lands also here, with Pinoleville Tribe up in Mendocino County and with the Rincon Tribe down in San Diego, and I'm really proud of that.
Well, awesome, and thanks for bringing the tribal broadband issue into the discussion. It's such a vital issue, and there are, of course, many federally recognized tribes here in California. Let's keep going quickly through Carl and Janus, and then we'll get into our discussion. And I should add, we are going to want to try to take questions here from our audience. You because you're here, will be able to ask questions. We do have a large audience online, but they're not going to be able to ask questions the way you will. So, Carl, over to you.
Great. A quick logistical note, because I have a couple of slides and I want to make sure it's working. And I landed at 3:45 a.m. after sitting on the runway in Chicago for a couple of glorious hours. So I'm going to stand so that I stay awake and so that I can see if the slides are advancing. However, I will start right on time and I will end on time with my 3 minutes. So let me start that clock. Let's start, though, with our common ground that Marc and Tasha both alluded to. Our North Star needs to be that we leave no California family behind, that every unserved and underserved California family and location has affordable, reliable, high-speed, low-latency broadband. Can we all agree that's our common ground?
Yep.
Now, both the federal bipartisan infrastructure law and the governor's executive order are clear. Our goal, our mission, is 100% universal service for every unserved and underserved family. And according to the FCC's updated maps, here are the numbers. That's 306,890 unserved locations, 154,591 underserved. Average California household size is smaller than mine of 5. It's 3.52 for a total of 1,624,413. Why am I giving numbers? Because each of those are names of families in our communities that are depending on us on this stage and in this room to get this right. Now, once in a lifetime investment. The bipartisan infrastructure law, and I'll try to keep an acronym-free zone this morning. The bipartisan infrastructure law passed by Congress, signed November of 2021, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Notice of Funding Opportunity states repeatedly this is a once-in-a-lifetime investment. The California Digital Equity Plan, excellent, please read it, recently approved, also notes the governor's executive order and Senate Bill 156, once-in-a-lifetime investments. This is once-in-a-lifetime funds in a state staring down a tremendous budget deficit. Now, forgive me, I have something called essential tremor, so my handshake, don't let it alarm you. But it's fun if you're trying to drink a cup of coffee. So, the place we are now, and I love this, because you heard it from Tasha and Rob as well. During the darkest days of World War II, Winston Churchill called his war cabinet in and he said, "Gentlemen," they were all men, "Gentlemen, we have run out of money. I'm afraid we're going to have to think." Creativity with limited cash was the message. I don't think this is a funding issue. I think this is a creativity issue. So that is why the leadership of the NTIA, no acronyms, the National Telecommunications and Infrastructure Administration, who have that $1.86 billion for the state of California, have made it clear publicly and privately, it's internet for all. It is not internet for some. States and territories are not to pick winners and losers. We need to make sure we're all winners, or those 60% of California's ground mass, 1 of every 5 Californians is part of the 40 rural counties, they are most likely to not be served well. So 3 lessons I've learned in 40 years in Silicon Valley and at my time at Tarana Wireless that we'll get into later. 1, technology advances. And we should know that in California, and it has. 2, finances are finite. We must leverage limited resources. And 3rd, timely deployments matter. If we're looking at 7 to 10 years out, we've missed another generation of kids. So with that, I'm turning it back over
All
to
right.
Drew.
Thank you very much. Janus. Give us your thoughts on the importance that for the industry that you speak for.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Won't be standing and don't have a slide presentation, but will be doing my best to stay
Would you
awake
like
as
to
well.
borrow mine?
No. Janus Norman, proud to be the president of California Broadband, or CalBroadband, sorry, which is the California Broadband and Video Association. We represent cable broadband providers throughout California. Our members, according to the FCC map that was referenced, provide services to 94% of California households. That's 95% of urban areas and 37% of rural areas. Our main focus in our advocacy related to the broadband moment is how do you do a couple of things. First and foremost, laser focus in on the unserved and underserved areas. I think the part that was just brought up about utilizing the FCC map and sticking with those definitions of identifying what those areas are is critically important. The amount of time that you spend sort of redefining what underserved and unserved is, I think is not a luxury that we have, and oftentimes results in resources going to areas that are currently already built out, and in many instances have multiple providers providing high-speed, reliable internet service. The second thing that I will mention is pretty consistent with the chairwoman's remarks. Recently reading an op-ed that the title of the op-ed said, our broadband performance has to be measured in results and not in intentions. And while I think SB 156 has great intentions, the underlying strategy of SB 56, the dynamics have fundamentally changed. SB 156 really relied on a robust one-time federal influx of cash, which we will still get, but it also relied on a very healthy general fund that would be able to provide state support to emerging entrants into the marketplace, whether that was a private entity that has a partnership with a municipality or a pure municipality itself. California's budget is no longer in that place. And so creativity of the moment, the necessity to pivot, I think is the moment that we are in order to see the full actualization of California's promise of getting broadband to all. I do very much appreciate RCRC's concern about the loss of the loan loss recovery program. As a former budget consultant, every dollar you restore there is a dollar out of someplace else. So again, there has to be just a recognition that times have changed, situations have changed. Second piece that third piece that I'll mention and then I'll turn back over is, one of the frustrations my members have is a lack of comprehensive thought around making sure one entity and the policies of one state agency, the policies of another state agency, what is under consideration within the legislature, all sync up in a common agreed upon strategy. Right now, you have contradictory strategies sort of being discussed and or deployed at the same time. So we would highlight things that discourage deployment to unserved areas, all well-intentioned, right? So you can have discussions around, and these are all things that we've said in our public comments, right? There's an ongoing discussion that the PUC has not yet got to surrounding service quality standards for broadband, right? One of the things that will be a concern for us is that that's built on a model of service quality for twisted copper wire. And one of the major questions is, do you bring in that legacy policy thought process into a new technology process? That will be something that the PUC has to wrestle with. The other, yes, sir.
No,
Finish your thought.
Finish your thought.
I will finish it by saying this. It takes dollars, but it also takes policies that align with what you're trying to achieve. And one thing that hasn't been said that I will mention here is the need to streamline the local permitting and approval process.
Yes. You are right. No,
I got applause.
You got applause, and that's subject of panel 3 today,
Yes.
so we're going to talk about that.
And the reason I say that, especially in the context of what the PUC's work on the FFA or the federal infrastructure dollars, some of that portion of money has a December 2026 timeline, right? So if you start thinking about the time to receive the application and then do the work, and then you are, to be fair to local counties and municipalities, dumping on them hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars of new project costs, you're gonna really run up against those timelines and risk having to send that money back.
Well, thank you very much. Now let's drive right into 2 core questions I'd like to talk about. First is time or timing, and the second is money. And so starting with time and timing, Rob, could you just kind of update us a little bit? Obviously, there's been some criticisms here of the timeline for deployment. Could you just speak about the challenge process, the timetable for that process, and what sort of everyday Californians can expect in terms of when BEAD dollars will supplement the previous dollars?
Sure. So,
yeah, just talk and it'll pick up.
Okay. So the BEAD process, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, this is part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And as was talked about earlier, California was allocated $1.86 billion for last mile grant programs. So what happens is we will publish a map and there'll be a challenge process. This process follows pretty closely what is required under the federal rules. So the federal government has a lot of say, and they actually have to approve the final map that is challenged. So we basically open up the map. We're providing training right now to stakeholders on how to do the challenge process. Entities challenge the map based on where they think broadband is or isn't, and they have to submit evidentiary records to support that claim. We then adjudicate, we make a determination, submit it to the NTIA. This process at the state level takes about 90 days. We submit it to NTIA, they have to approve it. So I understand the concerns about timing on BEAD, but we're also beholden in large part to the federal government, to the National Telecommunications and Information Administration rules.
So just as to the challenge process, is there anything more you'd want to say about like why that's important? In some ways, you know, a lot of states have been like eager to get going on this, but here it's almost like, well, we want to get the money. So like, is the focus on getting through that quickly or taking your time and doing it right?
Well, we have to do it right because that's the basis for awarding grants. So to the extent that the federal rules allow us to challenge the map and make changes to it, we will definitely do that. I think the big issue with any map, right, is the degree of accuracy. And I can't find a single map that's 100% accurate. And there's issues with all maps. What we see with the FCC map, the latest version that came out, you know, there's issues about coverage. I have a fixed wireless provider that's based in Modesto that claims to offer service at my house. I know they're not there. So to me, that's a problem. So we definitely have to challenge the map so that we have a basis for having a solid grant program.
Patrick and Representative Boerner, what are your thoughts on the timetable and the middle mile's role in the timetable that's already been kind of a subject of criticism here?
Yeah, well, I would say, I'm sorry.
No, please.
It's okay. Ladies first. Only time it's helpful to be a lady. I would say I'm really concerned about, it's not so much BEAD, but the FFA money.
Okay.
Right, the first tranche.
The ARPA money for those,
you guys
yeah.
call it ARPA, we call it FFA. That money, if you think about it, through the process of delays and delays and delays, we're gonna be ripping up the streets of California all at one time. And the longer we do it, the more truncated that timeline is if we don't wanna give back federal dollars. So when you think about that, people have to get, because again, I go back to people, right? They have to get to school, they have to get to work, they have to get to the grocery store, they have to get to the doctor, they have to go to their places of worship. I recently had a micro-chinching, we passed a micro-chinching bill, and they micro-chinched in front of my house, or my little complex where I live. I'm one of the 5 renters in the state legislature. And so we park on the street, and it's lovely, but it was a pain. It's a pain, and this was just micro-chinching. And when we do this to entire areas all throughout California, our people are going to freak out. So they want broadband for all, but they're going to be inconvenienced. And the more we truncate that, you know your labor costs are going to increase. You know the cost of the projects are going to increase. Both of those two things together, when you're truncating those timelines, result in fewer households connected.
Patrick.
In terms of timeline, would we like to see it go faster? Absolutely, but we recognize the challenge that the CPUC has. I'd say for us, we're playing the long game. As I mentioned, we were there to help craft SB 156, and before that, we started by looking across the United States to say, is there a model out there that is working well to reach hard-to-reach, underserved communities? And the answer was yes. We found a joint powers agency in Utah that had pioneered a model, pioneered a financing structure, had now decades of experience. That helped us develop what was in SB 156 in terms of the different pots of money and the different ways to finance projects going forward. We then took it to the next level of creating the public agency and continuing to move forward. So is it taking a little bit longer than we might like? Sure. But in the end of the day, we have confidence that we can get there in terms of the original vision for reaching these hard-to-reach communities. And the last thing I'll say is that another quote is that those that don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And so, yes, we could revert back to the traditional approach, but that hasn't served rural communities well in terms of getting access. That's why we have put so much effort into evaluating what's a good new model out there that can help us reach our hard-to-reach rural communities and tribal communities. And so we would argue it's important that we stick with the original vision of SB 156. Yes, we're in a state budget blip now, but as a former county administrator, I've lived through many of them. And I know that after a few years, we'll be in a different position in terms of the state budget. So if we can remain committed to that original vision, sure, reduce the amounts a bit so we can help do our part to balance the state budget, but keep that formula at the end of the day, those different structures intact so that we can build upon them in the future. They can complement BEAD, and this foundation that we're building, we can start to reach out in concentric circles to reach increasingly difficult to reach communities.
Let me add a frame. By the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act at the federal level, basically put $42.5 billion for last mile BEAD. A very small, relatively speaking, amount, $1 billion for middle mile, and then around $13-14 billion for the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is, of course, unfortunately just expired. Mm-hmm. And that's, in some ways, if you will, you can almost think of, again, last mile, middle mile, and OpEx. How do the numbers we've talked about here, the $7.1 billion, and I'm not sure if that includes or doesn't include the proposed reduction in budget that the governor has put forward. How do these numbers that we've been speaking about here in California compare with those federal numbers? Are the numbers right? Is there any room for saying, hey, we need to have more money in last mile, or more money in middle mile, or more money in supporting low-income people who won't have affordable connectivity fund? Let's hear from Marc and Carl and Janus on some of the questions about the money balance here in California.
Yeah, and but before I hit that, I want to just comment on something that Patrick and the chairwoman said. I think the other issue with the timeline that we have is every day that goes by without FFA grants being issued, you're going to have billions of dollars of projects released at the same time, and there are not going to be enough workers, qualified workers, to build all of this at the same time in the short time frame that you have. There's going to be supply chain issues. Like how are you going to go out and buy enough fiber to do that? You know, we've got relationships as one of the largest purchasers of fiber in the world with Corning and others, but not every awardee is going to have that same luxury. And I think we have to keep that in mind too, that there's going to be not only a crunch in people's discomfort of having their roads torn up, but we're going to have issues of finding qualified workers to do this.
What is the holdup on FFA awards, Rob?
So we are actually...
Just talking, they'll recognize you're talking.
We're actually poised to begin awarding FFA. We're working with the administration right now because of the budget situation, but we're ready to start going.
Okay, so it's ready to go. Now what about BEAD? BEAD won't be available until when?
So BEAD is a whole different story because we have to go through the challenge process. We also need our initial proposal volume 2 to be approved. So I expect that in the next couple months. After that, we have 365 days to do a subgrantee selection process and submit that to NTI for approval. So everything we do has to go back to the National Telecommunications and Information Administration for approval. At that point, then the grants can go out.
Okay. Carl and Janus, you want to talk about time or you want to talk about money? Your choice.
Well, let's talk about both
Okay.
then. And I want to go back to a comment that you made at the beginning that was so important and provocative, yet we'll peel back the onion.
Okay.
And I'll go to the provocative comment. You mentioned that there might be a dispute between Marc at AT&T on fiber and myself, Tarana Wireless, on fixed wireless. Because the right answer is fiber and. I worked my way through college hanging drywall, and we pulled the right tool out of our tool belt for the job at hand. By the way, AT&T is one of the earliest investors in Tarana Wireless, and our technologists and our top executives are talking almost every single week of how we achieve that fiber and goal to hit the real goal, which again is 100% universal service. And so that's the fiber part. It's fiber and. Something from a fixed wireless person you may not be used to hearing, use fiber wherever you can. Wherever it's cost effective and even semi-time efficient, use it. But the problem is we'll run out of money and time before we run out of hundreds of thousands of un- and underserved Californians if we think we can fiber the whole state. Patrick knows this better than anyone. 1 of every 5 Californians lives in one of those 40 of our 58 counties that's part of the RCRC. 60% of our land mass, 1 of every 5 Californians, and they're the most likely to get hurt. That's why we have great companies that use fiber and fixed wireless, right tool for the job in this audience, like Unwired, like Cal.net, like Digital Path, and others. We have more than 20 ISPs in California alone with thousands of deployments, meeting and exceeding all of the high-speed, low-latency standards of the government. If I can, I'm going to put up a slide and then I'm going to sit down.
Can we hear from Janus while you're doing that?
Yeah, as I put up this, are the slides still available? I have a slide with dog food. And Janus, you go ahead and then I'll go to that slide.
No, wait, I want to follow this.
Okay, you have the slide with dog food?
Food, yeah.
Folks in the back, Tim, Christian, do you have my dog food slide? Okay, so this dog eats his own dog food. My house is at the base of the Santa Cruz Mountains, heavy tree canopy, over 2 miles to the tower, non-line of sight. And I check fast every single morning. And so before I flew out a couple days ago, 500 megabits per second down. The FCC standard is 100 megabits per second down. 190 megabits per second up. The FCC standards is 20 up. Latency of 16 when the FCC standard is be under 100 milliseconds because it works. Last mile, when we're direct line of sight, we go 30 miles. Near line of sight, 10 to 12. Non-line of sight, 5.5.
Janus, what's your
Yeah,
reaction to these points and others on the time and the money?
Yeah, I'll do with money. Because to me, the timing is, it's going to be a challenge.
Are you concerned about the lack of, I mean, like, again, I'm not trying to pile on Rob here, but like, is there a similar concern that providers feel like, hey, these should have been awarded already, or are you fine with the FFAs not having been awarded?
No, I mean, look, we want to see all Californians connected.
Exactly.
And awarding of those grants achieve that goal. So I have members that have submitted, and so, you know, if they lose, then yeah, I'm concerned. So we're concerned about who gets awarded those grants. So yes, we're concerned because it's an important part of sort of the aspect. What I will say is, I think sort of 2 things related to the money aspect. One, I would agree that more money should be going to the rules. If I had ruled the world and I wasn't involved in the SB 156 discussions, the notion that you split evenly between urban and rural areas when rural areas have a demonstrated higher rate of unconnected households, I think is a policy flaw. Can that be corrected? Yes, it can always be corrected. Is that a very difficult political discussion? Absolutely. So we're probably going to stick with what we have.
All right.
But the second piece that I will say is that the notion that we don't have enough money is a very important policy frame, because I think California has gotten used to being the first. Mr. Osborn was absolutely correct. The CASIF program was innovative and revolutionary. When you have the influx of now the federal government putting $42 billion into the entire state at one time, California is now in the place of competing with other states. And so private capital is going to flow to wherever it's treated best. And so when you think about how are you constructing the BEAD program, how are you constructing now your FFA program, the CASIF program, and now you have companies that are saying, well, other states are now putting up public resources to offset construction costs. Because the other thing that's not mentioned here is none of this offsets operation costs. Yeah. And operation, maintenance, and innovation are the larger ongoing costs that really have to be discussed, especially when you're thinking about, and this is where I think we differ, when you start thinking about trying to stand up a municipal only, which is very different than Golden State Connect.
So the time has flown by. We're going to just do 3 or 4 more minutes, unless there's any burning questions, and there will be time throughout the day for questions. We want to encourage those questions. I'd like to give each of our panelists a chance to offer any closing thoughts, maybe with a bit of a solutions perspective. I mean, your chance to respond to anything that's been raised, or what is it that we need to be thinking and doing in confronting these challenges, because we've talked about challenges of timing, we've talked about challenges of money. We will be talking about challenges of rights of way and permitting, and also, of course, about the middle mile program and where it stands. But let's again just go down the line and give everyone 30 seconds to close out. And what do you want us to kind of make sure we're thinking about as we continue this program today? So, Rob, please.
Just to reemphasize that this broadband moment is actually bigger than a moment. It's been going on for a while, as Assemblymember Boerner indicated. This has been happening for a while, and what we're really trying to do at this point is get broadband to where broadband hasn't been invested for many decades, right? So we're trying to get it to where people live, but broadband providers aren't going, and that's part of the solution that rural counties has talked about earlier, and part of why Senate Bill 156 emphasizes empowering local agencies to bring broadband to those places. Lastly, I think just looking at the FFA applications, we had over $4.8 billion in applications, nearly 500 applications for last mile. We have $2 billion to spend. There's clearly demand out there for broadband for these communities, and that only addresses a portion of the unserved in California.
Thank you for emphasizing. You've been doing a lot out there in front, so I don't mean to say that California's being slow. It's just there's unique challenges to deal with, and it's exciting to be able to piece them together, right? Representative Boerner.
Yes, I think my final comment is we're all talking about wires in the ground or waves in the air, you can be whichever one you want. This is what we're talking about, but we have to remember that connectivity is 2 functions. It's a function of the technology and it's a function of affordability. And we haven't even talked about the affordability piece. There are people, you can build all the municipal broadband you want, but if people can't pay the operation and maintenance and the ongoing costs, those are going to be higher rates, and you're going to still have problems with affordability. So I think we can't talk about just the infrastructure side. We have to talk about how we're going to make sure it's affordable for real people in California.
Thank you for bringing that up. We'll talk about that in our next session. Go ahead, Patrick.
Hopefully everyone's hearing a shared interest from all of us in terms of making sure that everyone has access to high-speed internet. And it's going to take many forms. There's no doubt about it. And I'm sure the CPUC, when they're looking at applications, will find areas where AT&T's application absolutely is the one to go with. Hopefully there's other places where we're going to be funded so we can serve those remote rural communities. There's areas where wireless is absolutely the solution. It's an all-hands-on-deck approach that we need at this time, and appreciate the CPUC in helping us all get there. I think the one piece that is time-sensitive is making sure that we at least retain a base level of funding, so that within SB 156 for the loan loss reserve, so that all the options can continue to move forward, even if we need to reduce them in the interim by some amount. Let's keep a base level so we can keep all those options moving
We'll make
forward.
sure we ask that of Barbara at panel 2 later today. Thank you, Patrick. Marc.
Yeah, I would just add to what's already been said that, again, continuing to look for ways to extend the state's money by building partnerships with private entities that can help extend that money further. Also to be looking at ways that we need to be uber focused on those people that are the absolute most vulnerable.
What should CPUC and the broadband process and BEAD be doing to kind of incentivize those public-private partnerships? Are there additional points that come with that?
Yeah, I think Janus kind of hit on some of this as they're making the rules for BEAD, finding ways that incentivize companies to invest and to put in applications in California, particularly with BEAD. You're going to have companies that are, as Janus mentioned, can go to any state and invest their capital dollars, and they're going to go to the places where it's going to be easiest and fastest, and they can get return on their investment the quickest. And to be making sure that whatever rules you put in place are created in such a way that they're incentivizing people to invest and not creating roadblocks for them.
Carl.
Well, I promised to build on technology advances, so in 30 seconds. What 27 PhDs, 300 engineers, 450 employees, and 1 political science major are accomplishing at Tarana Wireless. 1, the ability to deliver non-line of sight. Buildings, trees, tree branch blowing in the wind, rain, snow, etc., recalculating 5,000 times a second. 2, point to multi-point. 1 radio on a tower or grain tower or water tower in rural California can serve 256 homes. Again, mileage. 30 miles direct line of sight, 12 near line of sight, 5.5 9 line of sight. And then last, interference cancellation. Because whether you're in licensed or unlicensed spectrum, there's a lot of noise interference. We don't jam other signals or our own, we null them, we quiet them, so that myself and the person way in the back can communicate with each other without interrupting anyone else who is communicating. This is California. We should know innovation matters. We can apply this to our mutual goal, every California family, as Chair Boerner so well articulated.
Awesome. Carl and Janus, you get the last word.
Yeah,
Good man.
3 things. 1, don't work against yourself would be my first point. So you need to encourage private investment. You need to encourage expansion because we don't have sufficient funding. You're going to need private capital. Legislature, PUC, that should be part of the lens in the policy discussions. Are we taking 1 step forward with resources and dollars, but 2 steps backwards with a policy that we are considering? The second thing is there needs to be a real honest discussion. I know you're having it later on today about, I will call it smoothing the back end as it relates to your local permitting processes so you can actually get projects out and on the ground. And the third thing that we would emphasize is we think it should be the FCC map so that you're all sort of operating on a known playing field, but pick the map and direct the money to truly unserved and underserved areas, recognizing that those areas that are not, recognizing that those areas
Your
that are,
mom is
I know, recognizing that, yes, while there are errors always in the maps, that really reflects where the vast majority of the unserved are.
Well, it's been wonderful. Please join me in thanking Rob, Representative Boerner, Patrick, Marc, Carl, and Janus. Thank you so much.
Drew, this is California. Can we do a selfie with the audience?
Is this
Can
like
we all
the
turn
Oscars,
around?
the Oscar ceremony?
No, no,
I
don't
don't want to
go.
be
Close
quick
to the
because
edge.
we're
Can we do a selfie?
rolling right into our Q&A. Come on out.
You're gonna get the light.
Oh, there we are. We're all in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Hey, thanks. Great job. Hey, nice long closing line there.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it.